Hey guys, welcome back to the Curly Reader. My name's Amanda, and today I want to talk with you all about the Arc of the Scythe trilogy. So this trilogy, I feel like, has been fairly hyped since Scythe came out in 2016. So it's been 4 years in the making. I finally jumped on the bandwagon in October when I hosted the Scythe Along with Emily from Books for Life channel. And we read Scythe and Thunderhead in preparation for The Toll, which just came out either in November or December. Now I don't remember. I read it in January. So I just recently read all three of these for the first time and I have thoughts. If you do not know, Scythe is about a utopian society where disease and death has been eradicated. There are little nanites that live in your body that heal you of any depressing thoughts. They keep your mood up. They can also heal you if you cut yourself or if you break your leg or anything like that. It will heal you automatically. If you suffer a severe traumatic injury, you are taken to a healing location where they will revive you and heal you and bring you right back to life. And if you are getting old, you can turn a corner and reset your self back to whatever age you desire, back to 21, I think is the lowest you can go. That's kind of the world we're living in. In the Scythe universe, there is also a Thunderhead, which is comparable to what we think of as the Cloud now. It's just an evolution of that. It's a little bit more amped up. The Thunderhead has taken over government. It has taken over basically making sure that humanity has what it needs to survive and that laws are being maintained. It's a big brother kind of thing where it has cameras everywhere. It's constantly monitoring you to make sure that what is going on should be going on. However, in this society, because death has been eradicated, there is this problem of overpopulation, and we need to figure out how to deal with that. So the Thunderhead determined that it was up to humanity to decide how it wants to handle life and death. So it doesn't want to take that away from humanity. It wants to continue to allow humanity to have control over that. So humanity decides that they are going to instill the Scythedom. And the Scythedom is made up of scythes whose job it is to go around and basically kill people. It takes it upon itself. Each scythe is given a quota of a certain number of people that they have to glean every day or every week or every month. They have a certain number of people that they have to glean, and the only way for you to pretty much die is to be gleaned by a scythe. The scythes also have the power to grant immunity for up to 1 year, which means that no scythe may kill you for a year. And because of this, the scythes inherently have a lot of power in the world. People are afraid of death, and they will give scythes whatever they want so that they don't glean them. And this whole series pretty much explores that topic of power and corruption and overpopulation and death and all of those topics. So it is fascinating, and Neal Shusterman did an amazing job with not only this first book, but the entire trilogy, in my opinion. So in this first book, Scythe, we follow two apprentice scythes. Each scythe is given the opportunity to basically have apprentice scythes, and those are the scythes that you train up in the way they should go, and then they can be tested and either become a scythe or not. The way that there is a need for more scythes, the only way that the scythes can die is if they self-glean. So they basically have to commit suicide in order to die. Once they're done with life, they self-glean, and then there is an opening for a new scythe to come in and take over. So this book is following two apprentice scythes who have been chosen to train in the ways of being a scythe. Neither one of them really wants to do it, but that's what makes a good scythe, is people who don't want to do the job. So that is what we are introduced to in this book. Are Citra and Rowan, are two apprentice scythes. We learn a lot about them. We learn a lot about the Scythedom and kind of its originations and what governs it. One of the distinct things about the Scythedom is that it is completely separate from the Thunderhead. The Thunderhead cannot communicate with the Scythedom, and the Scythedom cannot communicate with the Thunderhead. They're completely separate entities. Kind of like separation of church and state, but it's separation of Scythedom, scythes, and state. even though the Thunderhead isn't really the state, but whatever. So another thing that we find out in this first book that is also present in all of the other books is the presence of religion. Even in this society where pretty much religion has been washed out, there's not a whole lot left except one religion, and that is the Tonists. They have this calling to these sounds and like they call it the resounding tone, but just vibrations and sounds and that sort of thing. And there are monks and there are monasteries where they go. It's not gender specific. It's just kind of, if you want to be in the Tonist group, you can go to the monastery, and as long as you follow their ways, you can be part of them. So I thought it was very interesting that that was included in this, because I think even when we get to a point in society where we've figured everything out and science has been basically conquered, there's still a need for religion. And I find that that is a very interesting point to make in this book, is that even when things are all going right and things are all figured out, people still want to believe in a higher power, and they will still want to believe that something out there is bigger than they are. So, but that has a bigger storyline throughout the overarching trilogy, but it is something that we first meet and encounter in this first book. So that's kind of a brief overview of Scythe. I'm going to go over my overview of each of these 3 books, and then I'll get into spoilers at the end. So that's my overview of Scythe. Then we get into Thunderhead. Thunderhead is, as the title may ensue, it kind of introduces you more to the Thunderhead. You get to learn more about the Thunderhead and what its originations are and what it is doing for society. You start getting, in Scythe, we primarily only get the perspective of Citra and Rowan, and then at the beginning of each chapter, we get excerpts from different Scythe's past journals. And so in this one, instead of getting only the Scythe's journals, we're also getting thoughts directly from the Thunderhead. So that is something that is unique to this book and just adds a little bit more depth to the trilogy as a whole. We're learning more about the Thunderhead, what motivates it, what its concerns are, those sorts of things. We're also continuing to follow Citra and Rowan in this book, and just kind of what is happening as a result of what happened in the first book. We also meet a new key character in this book, Grayson. We meet in this book, and he is going to play a major role in the rest of the story, but his origination comes in this book, and we learn more about him. We follow his character in this book, and at first it seems a little bit disjointed, but by the end you kind of figure out what's going on with this. We also learn even more about the Scythedom and its origination, what the original founders of the Scythedom, what they were doing, what their intentions were. We get to see the Scythedom from a more global perspective, the governing body that is over the entire world. Instead of in the first book, it was primarily in what is currently the United States, not solely, but primarily. And here we're really starting to get the more global picture of the Scythedom and what its influences are, that sort of thing. And also that the power that it holds throughout the entire world. So that is briefly what we go over in the Thunderhead, or in Thunderhead. And then we get to the Toll. The Toll, you'll notice as each of these go on, I can say a little bit less and less about them because we're getting further into the story. But the Toll is significantly longer than each of the other 2 books. I feel like the Toll contains a lot more than the other 2 books. The story picks up pace fairly rapidly, and you get a lot of new things coming at you. We meet a lot of new characters in this, which is a little bit odd, I think, for a 3rd book in a trilogy. But we do meet multiple new characters in this. One of the new characters is non-binary, and it's a very prominent non-binary character, so there is that representation in the book. One of the distinct things about this book is that we are seeing, from the Tonist perspective, the religious aspect becomes really a really big deal in this book specifically. And in that, we are kind of seeing their, what in Christianity we would call the triad or the Trinity. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We kind of see that in here, where we have the Toll, which is like the head of the church. We have the Tone, which is the Holy Spirit. and then we have the father, which is the Thunderhead. And so they call it the thunder, the tone, and the toll, I think is what they call it. Um, but anyway, so we get that. That becomes an even bigger part of the story, like I said, throughout this book. One of the things that I did not like at all about this book, and one of the reasons why I didn't rate it very as high, is especially at the beginning. The other two books have a very linear plot. It just follows a timeline, or a linear timeline. That's what I meant. It follows this linear timeline. In this book, at the beginning, the way that they do their calendar, they don't count years by years because people don't have, they can live forever, so the number of years doesn't matter anymore. So they don't have their calendar set by years. It's set by animals, similar to like a Chinese calendar. But each year is a completely new animal. So instead of like the Chinese calendar has different, like a rotation of the same animal, this calendar, it's a brand new animal every single year. And so in the first like probably third of this book, you're bouncing back and forth between a 3-year gap. And it will refer to it by the year of the raptor or the ibex, or I don't even remember what the last one was. It's hard to follow because you're following 3 different storylines and you're bouncing back and forth between different years. It just makes it difficult to follow, and I didn't like that at all. It made it really, really confusing. By the end, everything kind of comes together and we're all on the same path again. We're all in the same time again. But that initial getting into it was very disjointed, and I did not like that. I think that might be it as far as what I can say about the Toll. I really, really enjoyed each of these books individually. I gave each of them 4 stars. I didn't give any of them 5 stars, but the series overall, I think, is a 5-star series. I think it's fantastic. There were just certain things about each of the books that I wasn't a huge fan of. But I think especially for a YA series, it hits a lot of super important topics: overpopulation, human nature, jealousy, greed, the imbalance of power. All of these things are addressed in this book. It is a very violent book, I will say that. I mean, people are killing people. That's their job, but the killings get very violent at times, and there are a lot of very graphic scenes that were a little disturbing. So I would keep that in mind if that's something that would affect you. But yeah, I think that's all of my thoughts about these that I can say that are not spoilery. So like I said, I really enjoyed Neal Shusterman's writing. His creativity and just attention to detail throughout each of these books, I think, was spectacular. I've never read Neal Shusterman before this, so I may be interested in picking something else up by him in the future. But like I said, I really, really enjoyed all 3 of these books. If you have not read these, I'm going to pick them all up. If you have not read these, I would recommend maybe stopping now because I'm going to start getting into spoilers. But if you have read these and you want to hear my thoughts about them, please keep watching. All right, so let's get into some spoilers. I have thoughts about each of these books individually, and then as, you know, about the trilogy as a whole. Okay, so my thoughts about Scythe. First and foremost, one of the things that bothered me about this book was that I didn't understand why the Scythedom allowed for such violent gleanings. It didn't really make sense to me that they would allow that. It would have made more sense, I guess, if they would have picked people, they would have been in charge of selecting their own people, but that there would have been a uniform way that everybody died. So whether that was, you know, a lethal injection or a poison tablet that they ate, or, you know, whatever, something that was instant, that was painless. It didn't make sense to me why things had to get so violent in this. I think that allowing for that violence led to the abuse of power that we see in Goddard and his New Order scythes throughout this. I just didn't quite get that. The other thing I didn't really understand was why, after Faraday self-gleaned, did Citra and Rowan still have to kill each other at the end? That didn't really make sense to me. They were being brought up by 2 different mentors at that point, and it made not a lick of difference if one of them kept going on and one of them didn't. If one of them became a Scythe and the other one didn't, or if they both did because they were being brought up by two different mentors. I understood initially what they were saying about only one can make it. I didn't understand why somebody had to die. And especially after Faraday was out of the picture, I really didn't understand why that continued on. I mean, I get it from a plot perspective because otherwise there would be no story. But from a reality perspective, that just didn't really make sense to me. One of the things I thought was interesting in here is that you have a few very one-dimensional characters. Goddard, Curie, Faraday. Some of those characters were just super one-dimensional. Goddard was just evil just to be evil, and there was nothing else about him. And then you had other characters like Rowan that were kind of both. One of the things that I really enjoyed about Scythe was the exploration into Rowan, especially in his journals, and understanding how his inner conflict on the fact that he enjoyed gleaning, he enjoyed being good at it, and it bugged him that he enjoyed it. After being the lettuce for so long and being ignored by his parents and by everybody, now he was finally good at something and being recognized for it, and he enjoyed it, but yet it was something that he didn't want to do. And so that inner conflict with Rowan, I really, really liked. I didn't really understand the whole Citra and Rowan love connection because they didn't spend a whole lot of time together. They had a lot of shared experiences, but they didn't spend time together, and for them to profess their love to each other didn't really seem realistic. So that was kind of disturbing, but I did really enjoy being able to see kind of the exploration of the nature versus nurture, how Goddard was raising Rowan versus how Curie was raising Citra, and just their different experiences. Like I said, the exploration into Rowan I really, really liked. Even Volta and Rand, and I can't remember the other one's name now, but the Goddard's little cronies, even seeing their different perspectives on things, I enjoyed because I feel like there's a lot of backstory to each of them, and they weren't just evil for the sake of being evil. They had other motivations, and especially Volta at the end was just like heartbreaking, but I get it. So yeah, those were kind of my thoughts on Scythe. One of the things I thought was interesting is when they do the first mass gleaning. No, that's not the first one that we see. When they do the mass gleaning at the engineering firm, though, that is working on the hibernation pods, we see in this why they were doing that. And I thought that that was kind of a neat little tie-in. But yeah, like I said, overall, I enjoyed it. 4 stars, but there were just a few things here and there that I'm like, I don't know. So that was my thought on Scythe. On to Thunderhead. Spoilery thoughts for Thunderhead. First and foremost, the whole resurrection trope thing. I don't even know if it's a trope necessarily, but the whole Goddard and Rand being resurrected, I thought was so completely off the wall, unbelievable. It kind of threw me. After I read that part of it, I was like, okay, I'm out. I'm done. I don't want to read this anymore. And then by the end, I was back in again because, that ending. I loved the ending of this book. But the resurrection thing, it just bugged me. For us to believe that Rand had a severed spine, crawled out of a fire, army crawled, was trying to save herself, and thought to grab Goddard's head because she could save him with only his decapitated head was just not believable in my eyes. For Rand to come out of it, I get. The whole grabbing Goddard thing, though, no. That was just too much for me. However, I thought it was interesting the way that they took it and the direction that Schusterman went with it. I thought that the exploration of the head being 7% of your body was interesting, and that when they put the head on Tiger's body, he still had some of the muscle memory and Tiger's inclinations, especially towards Rand. And I thought that whole dynamic was interesting. But them coming back from the dead, I was just not on board with. I'm still not on board with. Of the entire series, that part will forever bug me because it was just unbelievable. Especially the point that they emphasize so much that burning was the way you can die, and Rowan stuck around to make sure that they were all dead and all of that. And then it just, I don't know. It is what it is. But that the other thing that I found interesting with this, and this kind of goes into Scythe too, when Faraday self-gleaned, but he didn't really self-glean. I don't know. For me, I didn't understand how they have this immunity thing that they can give out, and they kiss the ring and they can tell, like, if they get near somebody that has immunity, their ring glows and yada, yada, yada. So they have that all figured out. Why don't they have a death database where they have record of who's actually died? Is there, I mean, I'm sure that the Scythe, or not the Scythe, that the Thunderhead does, where it has actually records of who has died, who is deceased, who is not in the world, yada yada. But why hasn't why haven't the Scythes tapped into that? I know they can't communicate, but they could do their own research on who's actually died, who's dead, who's not, that sort of thing. I don't understand why they didn't know that Faraday wasn't dead yet. And this like plays a role even further into the toll, where they think people are dead but they're not. And you would think that this far into the future that would have been figured out. That I didn't understand. Um, I did really think it was interesting that the Scythes built a blind spot to the Thunderhead initially. They thought to have a failsafe, and they created this blind spot that the Thunderhead didn't know existed, and that they were clever enough to think of that and to figure it out and to execute it. I thought that was great. Also, like I said, I loved the ending of this book. I thought it was just so great and so perfect. I had it figured out that he was going to sink Endura as soon as he said that he was getting engineers and all that around. But the way he went about doing it, the details, the craziness of it all, I just thought was great. I also liked getting to understand Rand a little bit more, her like internal conflict with, she's following Goddard, but she's not quite all the way in. She's continuing to follow him, but she understands that he's full of crap. And yeah. So anyway, like I said, that resurrection though, man, I think if it wasn't for that, I might have given that book 5 stars, but I couldn't do it with that resurrection. And then the last thing with the Thunderhead that I wanted to touch on is I didn't understand why the Thunderhead made everybody unsavory at the end of this one. It just didn't, like, the Thunderhead knew that the Scythes were the ones that were screwing everything up, not the rest of humanity, and the Scythes can't communicate with him anyway. So why was he punishing all of humanity when the people that couldn't communicate with him were the ones that were messing up? Like, because then he just screws himself over in the long run because he can't communicate with them, and he needs to communicate with them, and he can't. And so it just, I don't know. That didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, but whatever, it is what it is. It led itself to the story, I guess. We'll see. And then we are on to the toll. So, thoughts about this. Number one, the pyre scene was disturbing. That was the one scene out of this entire trilogy that probably affected me the most. And I almost had to put the book down and like stop reading for a while when I was reading that, because that mess was messed up. The detail that went into it, I just, yuck. Anyway, so, and then the fact that Goddard turned and gleaned all those people, the violence in this book was just disturbing. One of the things that I didn't quite get on board with this is, so Scythe, Faraday, and Munira, they find the island, they can't get into the secret vault thing, other people start showing up, they save them, they get them to the island, yada yada. And then Faraday just gives up and goes and lives in isolation on this island. Like, he has worked so hard to get so far, and then he just quits. I did not get that. I thought that was a cop-out for him. I mean, why not just self-glean and call it a day if you're going to be like that? Like, that just, I don't know. I didn't match his personality in my perspective. I didn't really get that whole thing. I thought that the fact that Schusterman took this to a sci-fi level was interesting. I did not see that coming a mile away. I feel like the ending of this, and kind of when Anastasia started getting into the different space explorations and how they failed and how they were actually masculinians and all of that, and it started going that route, I thought that some of that probably could have been alluded to in one of the previous books to kind of set us up for the fact that this could get into sci-fi territory, because I didn't see that coming. That being said, when I got to the end, I had to sit on it for a while because I wasn't quite sure how I felt about the ending, but eventually I came around to loving it and thinking that it probably had to be that way. And, yeah, I understand it now better, I think, after I sat on it and marinated, let it marinate on my brain a little bit. The other thing about the ending that I really liked was Citra and Rowan's ending. I thought that they had the perfect ending for their little insta love story. The fact that he had to wait hundreds of years to be with her, just I thought it was perfect. I'm glad that neither one of them died and that they were able to not be Scythes because they didn't want to be Scythes in the first place, and they were able to be together. They had all these shared experiences and they didn't really get to develop a relationship, but yet they stood together, and I liked that part of it. The Tonus aspect of this I thought was interesting, if not a little odd. Especially the Tonus that were like cutting their tongues out and stuff, like, ew. But I get people are like that. We have extremists now. I get it. I thought it was interesting that they took somebody who was not a Tonist and made them the Toll, because why the heck not? And that Grayson had no desire to be a Tonist. He didn't give two craps about any of their religion. But the fact that the Tonist, their ending to the book, I really loved the fact that the like soul Tonist was on a ship by herself for thousands of years, which I thought was crazy. And that they survived. And we got those little excerpts of the Tonist Bible like from years in the future, which I didn't really understand, and they were a little off-putting, and honestly I probably skipped some of them because I don't really get it. But at the end, understanding what it was and how like religion evolves out of these true events, I don't know. I thought it was a good plot point, and I appreciated it at the end. Although I don't necessarily know as though I appreciated the journey, I appreciated the end. So there was that. I liked how at the end humanity had to choose that there were no more Scythes. They were the ones that chose Scythes in the first place. They were the reason why the Scythedom existed, and they had to be the reason why it dissolved. They were the one that had to pull the trigger and say, okay, we're done. This isn't working. We need a do-over. We need a plan B. Moving on. The part of that I did not get was the like horrific diseases that were spread. Like every 20 years or whatever, 5% of the population, got these awful, horrific diseases that were painful, that were, just torturous. And why couldn't it have just been like, 5% of the population just drops dead, like instant heart attack and done, no pain. Yeah, I didn't get that. I thought that was odd. The fact that the Scythes went to like gleaning people out of pity or like out of sympathy, I guess they needed something to do, but I don't know. I just didn't understand that point of it. I thought that if it would have just been like an instantaneous thing, like similar to before with why did they have to have violent gleanings? Why couldn't there have just been a simplistic, like no pain way to die? I don't know. So that was one issue that I did have with the end of it. I also thought that the fact that Grayson left the Thunderhead and now the Thunderhead has no communication with anybody. It was interesting because everybody's unsavory, so there's no way for anybody to get out of that position anymore. And Grayson was like, nope, you crossed the line, you're done, I can't talk to you anymore. I thought that was good because it shows that even AIs are not above, the law. I don't know, that's not the right word. Like they're not above reformation. And so I thought that was a very interesting point to make, especially at the end of this. And then the other point that I wanted to make, and this is probably like my favorite character throughout this entire trilogy, was probably Scythe Rand. I thought that she had the most developed storyline and character arc throughout. I thought that her battle with Tiger and Goddard and Rowan and just like all of those influences and her going from bad to good, and the fact that she's the one that killed Goddard, I thought was perfect. I love that she brought him back, but with Tiger's mind. So yeah, I loved Scythe Rand. I thought that she was great, even though she was a villain throughout the book. So yeah, I think that's it as far as my spoilery thoughts go. Like I said, overall, I really, really enjoyed this entire trilogy. Let's see if I can hold them up. I enjoyed them all. And even though each of them had things about them that I didn't really like, I love the story, and it's one that I think will stick with me for a really long time. Highly recommend. Like I said, it's very violent, but outside of that, I think it covers a lot of really good topics, and I'm so glad that I finally picked it up and read it. So, if you have read this, I would love to hear your comments down below, chat with you down below. If you are going over spoilers, please mark them as spoilers so that other people who see them know that you're talking about spoilers. Also, if you would like to connect with me on Instagram, to chat on Instagram so you don't have to worry about labeling things spoilers, you can do that as well. My Instagram handle is in the description box down below. And yeah, other than that, I hope that you enjoyed all of this, and I hope that you stick around and subscribe. And until next time, see ya!